Okay, I have an introductory slideshow, so I'll start that before Sid gets into his presentation.
Mhm.
Just give me 1 second. Can everyone see?
Oh, look at that hair.
Great.
Yeah, wow.
Who is that guy?
Who is that guy?
So I'll just get started. Welcome everyone to our first research room of the year. I'm the new research lead, so this is actually my first research room presentation that I'm participating in and hosting, so that's exciting for me. And thank you, Sid, for being willing to present, especially for the first presentation of the year. Sid actually presented, I believe last year, was it?
Yes, yeah. I think sometime in March last year. Yeah.
Yeah, and he liked it enough to come back, so that's great. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. No, it's my pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much.
And this is me, Akanksha. I'll be hosting the research room for today, and Austin's the co-facilitator. I don't think he's here yet, but he should be joining soon. And Sid, did you want to introduce yourself for everyone?
Yeah, sure. Let's see if we can do a dual task. Let's see how well people can read that or just listen to me. Maybe you could just listen to me. So my name is Sid. I'm actually from Halifax, Nova Scotia, but right now I'm studying in London, Ontario, at the University of Western Ontario. As you all know, I'm a psychedelics researcher, and the research that I want to talk about tonight is mainly going to be about an online study I've been trying to develop for quite some time and looking at visual illusions and cognition. I have a variety of interests. My background before getting into neuroscience was actually philosophy. So I did a master's in philosophy before my current neuroscience program, before doing my PhD in neuro. And then before doing my master's in philosophy, I did a bachelor's in music, and it was like a combined bachelor's in music and neuroscience. So I've kind of been educationally all over the place and wearing different hats and lifelong learner. So I did do, as Akanksha had mentioned, I did a presentation for this kind of journal club for this research room last year in March. A lot of the information is going to be more or less the same, really trying to promote the study and give you an idea of what online psilocybin research kind of looks like, or one of the ways it can look like. And I hope, with this new group of people, it'll still feel fresh and I hope it can, incite interesting discussion.
Thank you for that. So
Mhm.
we'll just get started. I'll let you share your screen.
Sure. Let's see. So if I do this screen too, but if I, um, how is that?
That looks great on my end.
Looks good on your end. Looks good okay. If it looks good for you, I imagine it looks okay for everyone. And can you see my little laser pointer too?
Yeah,
Okay, great. And then how about if you can see me switching the slides and everything?
yeah,
Okay, great. Shall I get started, Akanksha?
yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. I already introduced myself, but I'll do it again. My name is Sid, and it's a real pleasure to be here with Maps Canada again. I'm a big fan of Maps Canada, and I've been a part of this community for some time now. I used to be an active volunteer on kind of the podcast in its early days, so it's really nice to be involved again and invited again. So I really appreciate kind of being a part of this family, so to speak. As I said, the study I want to talk about tonight is going to be an online psilocybin study that's very much looking at psilocybin's effects on visual illusions and cognition. But really tonight, I'm gonna try and invite you to think of psilocybin and visual illusions as being an interesting combination in learning how visual processing works and also understanding consciousness. So As many of you, I'm sure, know, psilocybin is kind of the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, so-called magic mushrooms. It's a 5-HT2A receptor agonist. So what that means is it's a serotonin receptor agonist. It binds to serotonin receptors that are distributed widely throughout the brain. And it elicits an altered state of consciousness, which we're all familiar with, I'm sure, educationally or experientially, perhaps. Now, a lot of the research that many of us are probably familiar with are the incredible mental health research that's surrounding psilocybin. We're probably familiar with the research, the pioneering work done at Johns Hopkins and Imperial College London. And now it's really grown over the years to different institutions around the world, which has been beautiful. Even in Canada, the Canadian government has started administering or delivering grants for psilocybin research, particularly aimed at addressing mental health and substance use disorders. So that's really exciting to see that this front is being revitalized, even in Canada. Now, although a lot of the research is focused on the mental health benefits for psilocybin, as I mentioned, I'm a consciousness researcher. So I study philosophy of mind, and my whole thing in neuroscience is how we can use the tools of neuroscience to understand consciousness, to understand conscious states. And I believe that psychedelics, including psilocybin and other psychedelics like LSD, can be really helpful pharmacological tools in the lab to tell us more things about consciousness that we don't already know. A lot of my research focuses on this question of what can altered states tell us about the nature of mind, and what can altered states tell us about the nature of consciousness. And the idea is very simple. At any given moment, we inhabit, let's call it a normal state of consciousness, and we take a lot of aspects about our experience for granted. The sense of self, for instance, we probably don't think about the fact that we are a self and we experience life as being a self and being the same self over time. And yet some people who experience ego dissolution, which is a very empirically validated experience under psychedelics, tells us that this component of selfhood is actually malleable within consciousness. So by looking at how consciousness changes in psychedelic states, we learn more about how consciousness actually is. And the way it's maintained in the brain. So I'm very much coming at psychedelics research with the attitude of what can this tell us about consciousness? Now, thinking about psilocybin, much of the research has actually described the psychedelic state as an elevated level of consciousness. Researchers have said this, have proclaimed this because psychedelics like psilocybin increase the complexity of brain activity. And it's thought that the complexity of our brain activity at any moment is related to our levels of awareness and levels of wakefulness, or in this case, levels of consciousness. That's another way of phrasing it. Now, this kind of got me thinking, if the psychedelic state is an elevated level of consciousness, then a higher state should offer some sort of performance advantage. Are there actually circumstances where someone under psilocybin or experiencing psilocybin might be better at certain tasks than when they're not? Now, as you know, my study is all about visual illusions. And so before I get into the illusions component, it might be helpful to get our bearings first on how we can think about vision and how we can think about the visual system. So at any given moment when we're going about our day, our visual system in the back of our brain, the occipital lobe, it's widely distributed throughout the brain. The whole brain's involved in vision. But the visual system takes in information in our environment like shape, texture, motion, light, like brightness, luminance, and it puts those things together to create the objects in our environment and to create the scenes that we experience. But there's also a heavy degree of top-down influence. So our prior expectations and experiences in a given environment can actually influence how we see that environment and how we experience it. And so we can actually start to think of our visual system as a prediction machine or a hypothesis generator, that at any given moment, our visual system is trying to present us with the thing we are most likely seeing at any given moment, taking the bottom up and the top down information. So it takes the bottom up sensory signals of shape, texture, motion, all that stuff. And it combines that with our prior knowledge and our prior expectations and beliefs, and with some rules of vision constraining, the computations in our brain, it gives us the output. What we see is the combination of those two processes, and that allows us to see things. In this case, this person is seeing a cup. Now, with this model in mind, sometimes our visual system might not actually give us the most accurate visual experience. Now, to demonstrate this, I want you to take a look at this mask, and I want you to determine whether the face of Einstein is facing towards you or facing away from you. And keep looking at it. It should start rotating soon. Now, as it's moving, I think you should probably, if you're like me, you'll realize that it was facing away from you the whole time. And now maybe we'll be able to experience it as facing away or concave when it comes back to that same position. But if you're like me, no matter which way it rotates, no matter which orientation it's in, I actually can't help but experience it as sticking out, as facing towards me. Now, the explanation for this illusion is interesting. The explanation that's been given canonically is that our visual system has been trained to see faces as convex our whole lives, and our ancestors as well. Anything with two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, our visual system has computed the rule. Anything with those collection of features is always convex. It's so unlikely for a face to be hollow that we actually can't even experience it as such. Now, there's been interesting research with psilocybin and kind of these top-down predictions showing that psilocybin impairs some levels of motion perception, higher level motion perception, and even the experience of these kinesia figures. So I'm assuming most of us sees a triangle here and a square here, but what's really there are just these kind of Pac-Man-like figures. And using Gestalt principles, our brains just fill in the gaps. And so we see a square and a triangle when there actually isn't any. So this is an example of our priors influencing what we see. Now, it's been shown that psilocybin actually reduces the electrical brain activity involved with experiencing these images. Now, despite these two studies, there's actually not that much evidence of psilocybin disrupting top-down illusions perceptually, actually showing that people are experiencing these things differently. And so this kind of got me thinking that if certain visual illusions result from top-down processes, from the influence of our expectations on perception, and psilocybin reduces the influence of top-down processing on visual perception, then could psilocybin actually make someone resistant to top-down visual illusions? That is to say, could someone under psilocybin actually experience the hollow mask as hollow? If we show them this mask, could they actually indicate when the mask is rotated in its hollow orientation and when it's convex? That would be some sort of, in a manner of speaking, a performance advantage. Now, this again is where I'm trying to land now is eventually bolster the case for visual illusions as very interesting tools that we can use in the lab, or in this case online, to show us how psilocybin is affecting visual perception. All of these illusions have different causes and different mechanisms, and the illusion itself occurs at different stages of visual processing. And by observing how psilocybin affects perception for each of these illusions, we get an interesting picture of how basic visual processes are influenced by psilocybin. Now, to get at this, I've developed an online study. I call it the Higher Consciousness Study, where we're looking at psilocybin users around the world, those who are using it recreationally or medicinally, actively as a part of their lifestyle. Essentially, we're just treating this as a purely observational study for those who are interested in participating. Now, right now, I'll walk you through the kinds of illusions that we're giving to participants and how it is we're actually measuring illusion strength online. we give three different kinds of illusions in the study. We give what are called low-level illusions. Now, a low-level illusion is any illusion where its cause or its mechanism can be explained at the level of the neuron. The best way of describing what happens or why the illusion works the way it does has to do with talking about activity in the retina and the LGN, the lateral geniculate nucleus. You don't have to know what that is, that's okay. But basically, this is just very early stages of visual processing. So brightness illusions are commonly low-level illusions. This is a brightness contrast illusion. We show a series of high-level illusions. These illusions are explained by things like our prior expectations and our beliefs. In this case, our expectations that all faces are convex. That helps us explain the hollow mask illusion. And then we show also a series of mid-level illusions where the mechanism is not as well known, and it's kind of a combination between these low-level neural explanations and these high-level explanations of expectations and beliefs influencing perception. So I'll walk you through a choice example here that we give to participants. Now, I want you to take a look at this line and consider whether the length between A and B is smaller, greater, or the same length as the length between B and C. If you're anything like me, I experience A to B being longer than B to C. Some of you might be familiar with this illusion. It's the Mueller-Lyer illusion, and this is often how it's depicted with two parallel lines, kind of one on top of the other, where the top is perceived to be smaller and the bottom is perceived to be longer. Now, what is an explanation for this illusion? The canonical explanation for the Mueller-Lyer has been that it's a cultural byproduct. So most of us, I'm assuming all of us, have actually been raised in rooms that have 90-degree angles in the vertices of the room. So in the corners of rooms, we have 90-degree angles, and our brain is always interpreting depth, the depth of the room, how close things are in the room and how far away certain parts of the room is. So when you take a look at this illustration here with the ticket booth and the back of that room, this red line here and this red line is actually the same length when it's encoded in our retina. So it's the same length on our retina, but our brain, our visual system knows that this line here is further back in the room than this ticket booth, which is closer to us. So to show us that it's two different depths, to show that depth perception, our brain actually makes us see that line as longer and different than this line here, when they're actually, again, the exact same length. I will mention, as kind of an asterisk, that a recent paper has come out attempting to actually debunk the explanation for this illusion, which is really exciting. It kind of shows how dynamic this area of research is that we still don't fully understand a lot of these things, and there's still a lot of debate over how these things work. But for now, I'll stick with the cultural explanation, and we can perhaps discuss what actually is going on afterwards if people are interested. So anyway, how we measure illusion strength for the Mueller-Lyer is we get individuals to take that middle arrow and actually just place it in the center of the horizontal line. And that tells us where they perceive the middle to be. And what we can actually do is we can give two versions of the illusion. Now, we give one version with the illusion intact and another version where we remove the illusory element. So we actually take away the side arrows and we get people to do the same thing. Place that middle arrow at the center of the horizontal line. And what we actually find is that people in our kind of preliminary data, I don't have anything to show you today, unfortunately, but in our preliminary data analysis, we find that people are much better at placing that at the center of the line when the side arrows are removed. And that the difference between those two tasks tells us how strongly someone is experiencing the illusion. Now, this is another illusion where I'm assuming most of us experience that middle horizontal gray bar as a different shade of gray across the line when it's actually the same. And it's the columns in the back that influence our perception of the shade of gray. So we actually just get people to try and adjust that gray bar until it appears, until it appears to be the same shade of gray. And depending on how much you have to adjust it, will actually tell us how strongly you experience that illusion. Another example is the Adelson checkerboard, where you have these two squares, A and B, and they look like to be a different shade of gray, when actually they're totally the same shade of gray. And the reason we experience them as different is that our brain knows that that's a white tile and that that is a black tile. And so it tries to preserve that distinction even though the luminance is the same. This is a really fascinating illusion because a shadow, this has to do with the shadow that is being created by the cylinder. And a shadow is a three-dimensional phenomena, yet even on this two-dimensional screen, our brain can compute the properties that we should expect when we see a shadow, which I just think is super neat. So anyway, what we get is we get people to actually adjust these two squares until they appear to be the same shade of gray. Now, here are some more fun illusions. These dots might look like nothing to you now, but once they actually start moving, you can kind of see quite obviously what's going on. We see an individual doing jumping jacks. We can actually interpret the way, we can infer the sex of the figure based on the dots alone and how they move. And then we can even interpret the direction in which they move. And so this can be explained again by the fact that our visual systems have been trained to interpret the movements of other agents in the world who look like us, who walk like us. And it's beneficial to be able to interpret movement like this. And so that's why we can decode that, even though we've removed the face, the body, everything, and we just restrict it to these dots. Now, you might wonder, how do we actually measure the hollow mask illusion? Now, what we do here is we actually get people to indicate the direction that the nose is moving. So when it's moving now, it should look like it's moving to the right. And here it's moving to the left. And now it's moving again to the right. The idea here is that if you're experiencing the illusion, you should be experiencing that flip of the nose where it switches direction. The idea here is that someone under psilocybin might actually not experience that flip, which is really odd. And you might even wonder, what does that even mean? It's like, that seems very odd because we can't see it any other way, but someone under psilocybin might. So we get them to indicate how they experience the illusion based on the direction of the nose. So this is just to kind of paint the picture of the full suite of illusions that we use and how we're measuring illusion strength. Now, to tell you a bit about the actual study, in terms of inclusion-exclusion criteria and the design of the study, we're looking for mainly healthy volunteers, those with prior experience with psilocybin, who are already taking it as part of their lifestyle. Again, it's an observational study. We don't prescribe doses or anything. It's a very much in the wild. You know, if you're already taking psilocybin, or if someone you know is taking psilocybin recreationally or medicinally, we invite you to consider doing these tasks while under its influence, if that's something you feel like doing. And we screen out individuals with different kind of potential health contraindications, like high blood pressure, those who are taking SSRIs, any current or past psychiatric diagnoses. Things like this were very important to include when we were actually getting the study approved by ethics. I could give a whole talk about navigating ethics boards with psilocybin studies, but we can talk about that later. So to paint the picture of how the actual study looks, on the first day that someone comes to the study website, they'll be greeted with a screening. And if they want to learn more and participate in it, they'll be shown a screening questionnaire. And then if they're successful, they'll be recruited, enrolled into the study. And they'll be invited to do their first day of testing immediately. Half of the participants will be invited to test on their first day sober. And then their second test day, which will be 2 weeks later, will be under psilocybin. And the other half of participants will actually be invited to test first under psilocybin and then 2 weeks later without psilocybin. So the example I'm showing you here, this individual that you see on the screen, they'll be doing it without psilocybin on the first day. So they're given a demographics questionnaire. They'll be given the visual illusion battery that I just showed you. And we'll actually give them a series of cognitive games. So this is from the Cognition platform. These are a series of essentially computer games that can be played on a laptop or a desktop, and they give clinically validated measures of reasoning abilities, short-term memory, concentration, attention, reasoning, planning. So they give very strong measures of these different kind of cognitive faculties, and using them, we can see how psilocybin is affecting our faculties of memory or concentration or reasoning. Now, so they do the illusions and the cognitive games, and then they're invited to test again 2 weeks later. Now, this particular individual will be asked to do it under psilocybin on the second test day. So then they're given a dosage questionnaire. So this is collecting information about what strain of mushroom they're using, the method of ingestion, how long they're going to wait after ingestion to actually do the test. So if they take mushrooms in whatever capacity they decide, how long do they wait before actually performing the tasks? And then they'll take the psilocybin, and which isn't actually part of the study procedures. And what's really neat about this study is that we have what's called a trip sitter design. And so we encourage participants to actually have someone else in the room with them that can act as a trip sitter for 2 reasons. One, to make sure that the individual is comfortable and safe and feeling good throughout the testing session, and also to potentially help with some of the data acquisition to help keep them on task and help them in any way that they might need as they're kind of doing these tasks. So they ingest the psilocybin, and then in the company of their trip sitter, which is optional, you don't need a trip sitter, it's just encouraged, they'll repeat the visual illusions and the cognitive games. Now, and again, half of the individuals will do it sober first, and the other half will do it under psilocybin first. And some participants will get the cognitive games first, and some participants will get the visual illusions first. So we've counterbalanced it as well to deal with any order effects. So in terms of kind of rounding out the talk now, and what do we actually predict from this study? Well, I predict, based on the theories that I've shown you tonight, that psilocybin will reduce the sensitivity for higher level illusions. What does that mean operationally? For me, it means that someone under psilocybin might actually be better equipped to take that middle arrow and actually place it in the center of that line. They might be so good at it that they actually perform better than someone who is sober, who is not under the influence of psilocybin. In the case of the hollow mask illusion, it might be that a psilocybin user or someone experiencing a psychedelic state is actually better able to indicate when that mask is shown in its hollow orientation, better than a sober individual. Now, despite these improvements on those tasks, those more accurate judgments being made, I also expect that psilocybin will induce overall impairments in cognition. And this is just echoing the vast amount of research that has showed kind of impaired attention or impaired concentration or memory under psilocybin. Now, in terms of the overall significance of this study, I think one of the most exciting things about this particular project was this idea that we can actually collect experimental data from within the psychedelic state without actually having to give people psilocybin. The psychedelics research community is a really wonderful community where psychedelic enthusiasts around the world are actually really they're quite privy to the research. They're quite savvy about what's going on in the research of psychedelics, and a lot of recreational and medicinal users around the world are quite eager to participate and help with research, which is really exciting. So what's great about psychedelics research is that there's a lot of online questionnaires, online surveys that collect information about the psychedelic state. But a lot of these studies are post hoc surveys after the drug effects have actually worn off. So you're not collecting information from within the psychedelic state. You're collecting people's memories of the psychedelic state, of the drug effects. Some studies are microdosing studies, which actually will assess kind of what's happening after someone's taken a psychedelic like psilocybin, for instance. But by definition, a microdose is not a psychedelic state. If you're actually experiencing different perceptual changes, it's arguable that you've no longer taken a microdose. And so by definition, these microdose studies aren't collecting information from within the psychedelic state. And I think by including this kind of trip sitter paradigm, we've kind of provided a framework that researchers around the world might want to use for interesting online research, to answer, fascinating questions with psychedelics without having to actually jump through all the regulatory hurdles necessarily that are imposed by one's government. Um, and another aspect, again, kind of zooming out to the more consciousness lens of this research, we can learn quite a bit about the consciousness as a phenomena from looking at the psychedelic state. I think the significance of this project is that we might actually show that aspects of perception can be enhanced while aspects of cognition might actually be reduced or attenuated. And I think this might compel us to not look at consciousness in terms of levels, Again, we talk often about consciousness in terms of higher levels or lower levels of consciousness. But when we appreciate that aspects of perception might be improved or aspects of cognition might be reduced, or vice versa, it kind of encourages us to think of consciousness as a multi-dimensional framework, where talking about it in terms of higher and lower just doesn't capture a lot of the nuance and the subtleties that are inherent to the psychedelic experience. So I think this study might help encourage a more dimensional view, multi-dimensional view of consciousness. So I'd like to just take a moment to thank my lab. I'd like to thank you all for your attention, for listening to this presentation. I appreciate everyone's presence. And I want to draw special attention to this gentleman here, Michael Bach. He's a wonderful vision researcher from the University of Freiburg. And he programmed a lot of the actual visual illusions tasks. So none of this could actually happen without him. So I just want to give him a special thank you. And if any of you are interested in this study and would like to learn more, you can scan that QR code. You can check out this URL here, this website here, or I encourage you to just email me if you have any questions about the studies. We're going to be making some changes to the study in the next few weeks, and so we'll be changing some of the stimuli, and so we're still actively recruiting. And so if you're not, if you know people who are interested in participating in the study, we're actively recruiting and we're accepting participants. We'll be accepting participants for a while, so feel free to share this with your networks as well. And anyway, I just want to thank you again for your attention.
Thank you. That was great. Someone asked in the chat, until what date are you actively recruiting participants?
We don't have a set date. I think we have it in the ethics application to actually collect data for up to 2 years from the study's start date. And so I think we're maybe 1 year in, and it may be open for another year, but we don't have actually a set kind of cutoff date for recruitment. It has been admittedly difficult to actually boost participants or boost recruitment for the study. That's something that we've been finding because it is a bit more involved than actually doing like a survey or a questionnaire. It's not just a 10-minute thing. It's kind of like, there's an element of, because we can't tell people to take psilocybin and we wanted to treat it as observational as possible. It's we're at the mercy of when people who participate, maybe someone only takes psilocybin, a few times a year. And so even though they have the tests available for 2 weeks, it might take several months before they're planning to take psilocybin. So recruitment, actually completing data collection for an individual, it varies between participants so that we can make it as accommodating as possible. I see that Riel has a question. How long does it take? I believe data collection is about 30 minutes, about 30 minutes or so. Again, it depends on how quickly an individual moves along through the tasks, but we try and target it for 30 minutes, not more than 40. Again, because of just attrition, how long it might, when someone is having that experience depending on the reason for why they're taking psilocybin, whether it's recreationally or medicinally. Maybe they wouldn't want to, be doing an online study for an hour of that whole experience, which is totally understandable. And, I wouldn't admonish anyone for feeling that way. So we try and keep it 30 minutes max or 40 minutes max. But even then, that might be a bit too much. So we're learning and we're kind of trying to pioneer this paradigm or make it as tight as we can, because it would be really cool if this could be, even for this illusion study, if the illusions don't work, that's one thing. But it'd be really cool if this methodology could be kind of bootstrapped for other research questions too. Much faster data collections, for instance, if it is just like one game or one visual task that only takes 5 minutes. I mean, I could see ways that this could be leveraged for other research questions. So it's a lot of novelty thrown into one project all at once.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about how for illusions. Oh, 1 second. Someone's trying to join. It's interesting that you mentioned that top-down processing actually diminishes during psilocybin, because I would assume that with the hallucinogenic properties, there would actually be greater top-down processing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's no, that I think that's really interesting. That's an interesting point. A lot of the research there has kind of come from this paper, the Rebus paper. I think the theory is relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, REBUS, and that was a paper from Robin Carhart Harris, who I'm sure most of us are familiar with, and Carl Friston. Carl Friston has done a lot of interesting research with this idea of predictive processing, which has been, or the free energy principle, which has been linked to this kind of theory of consciousness, the predictive processing theory of consciousness. Predictive processing actually isn't just applied to consciousness, but it has been used to explain a lot of consciousness. So the idea in that paper between Carl Friston and Robin Carhart Harris is that, yeah, psychedelics might actually reduce the influence of these top-down priors, and they kind of try and paint a similar case that I made for you tonight. They kind of synthesize all this work to make, to show that there are relaxed beliefs, as the title suggests, under psilocybin. And there's still so much we don't know, though, I will say, and there's still so much, a lot of this is still so theoretical, and we just need more good empirical research to kind of bolster theories like this. And this was just one way of getting at it.
Yeah, Ali, did you have a question?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Sidath. That was really interesting. I'm looking forward to participating, hopefully.
Cool.
I have you were talking about the methodology. So the way I understood it was you'll have two groups, one that will take do the visual task, the task, and then 2 weeks later take the psilocybin and do the task at that point.
Hmm.
And the other group will take psilocybin first and then do the tasks, and then 2 weeks later do the same tasks.
Hmm.
Given, I mean, this is where I want to ask you, do you think that there might be residual effects of the psilocybin, the
Hmm.
group that takes psilocybin first, because of the um, potential of there still being the top-down influence, not, I guess, being rigid, because psilocybin will act on the top-down networks even beyond the day of
Sure.
into the week?
Sure. Sure. So just to make sure that I understand your question, I'll phrase it back to you.
Sure.
So is the idea here that those who have taken the psilocybin first will actually have kind of an order effect because they've taken psilocybin, and
Yes,
the
exactly.
lasting effects of psilocybin, it'll influence that second data collection, which could not be said for those who had just done the task sober the first time and then do it.
You said it way better than I
Yeah.
asked it, so that's great.
No, it's okay. No, I just want to make sure I understand. Now I don't now there's been great research showing that, for instance, functional connectivity in brain networks like the default mode network shows lasting changes for like a month, let's say. And that's really interesting. I don't think, for the purposes of this study, for the very specific illusions that we're working with, that I don't think that those whatever long-standing changes there are in the brain as a result of taking psilocybin once, I don't think it would hamper the experience of these illusions or these cognitive games 2 weeks later. We have the 2 week separation to kind of have people not look at the stimuli and not do the task to like minimize practice effects and also somewhat lose their familiarity with the tasks. And also, the time course of the drug itself being 4 to 6 hours, hopefully, by the next day, their visual system is functioning as it normally was, before they had taken the drug. Now, another thing though too here is that whatever long-standing changes in the brain might be dose dependent too. Another thing too, it's hard to control these factors because we can't actually again prescribe a dose. Some people, they might be totally comfortable taking 3 grams of psilocybin, and in terms of what impacts that has on the visual system for 2 weeks, I don't know of that research having been done. Maybe it has. I'm not aware of it. And maybe if it's 5 grams, there are more changes there than there would being 1 gram. Who knows? I don't know, but we can't stipulate that. So the best thing that we could do was have this kind of counterbalancing to at least control for order effects. And we can see that, maybe it would be very interesting. I'll put it this way. It will be very interesting if we find that everyone under psilocybin who did it the first time shows a different picture than those who did it sober the first time. But it's so exploratory, so we'll have to see how it comes out in the data. I hope that was satisfying.
Yeah, Asani, did you want to ask another question?
Yeah, so thank you so much. That was so interesting. I found it, especially your study procedure, your how I didn't think of the idea of like recruiting people who are already doing this. So this is great, and I think more people need to know about this. So you get more participants and you get more data for that. But so I was wondering because you already use some tasks, some cognitive tasks, but I'm not sure like what kind of norms you use. Like, why did you choose those tasks specifically? Because there's a lot of perceptual tasks, normalized perceptual tasks, and I was wondering. I'm not sure. I don't know the literature about the perceptual tasks on psilocybin, but I'm guessing it might enhance if we're talking about the like enhancing perceptual abilities. Like if you use it with the normalized task, you should see the enhancement just with the performance. So what do you think about this?
So when you say perceptual tasks, are you referring to the visual component or the cognitive component?
So the tasks that you use right now is more like Stroop, some more cognitive tasks from what I
Oh, so you're
saw.
talking about like the cognitive games, like the Kraos.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So you use those ones, but I was wondering as well. So this is one part, and the other part, what do you think about using more perceptual tasks? Like I don't know, there is some task with the hallucinations for people who have hallucinations, and like they have basically pictures, and they have to identify objects in the picture to find the object if they see it or not, and like there is some perceptual tasks. So I was wondering, like, if you know
Yeah.
about that, like, what do you think?
Well, I'm not very perhaps I'm not very familiar with those other tasks that you might be mentioning. The reason we do the Kraos games is that our lab has done a lot of research with these cognitive tests already. My supervisor actually, a lot of his research has been developing these tasks. He developed them a long time ago, and we actually understand these cognitive tests really well in different populations, like in disorders of consciousness patients, or sorry, like Alzheimer's patients, Parkinson's, different psychiatric. So what's great about these cognitive games is that we actually have a lot of reference points to understand what comes out in the results. So we could actually compare what does the picture look like under psilocybin versus someone with, let's say, ADHD, or someone who has Alzheimer's, or someone who has Parkinson's. So that's one reason we use those kind of the cognitive tests that we did, is that we actually have a lot of reference points to compare that data with. Another reason that we use these tasks is that they're actually quite fun as games. Again, they give clinically validated measures of attention and reasoning and stuff like that. But what's good about them is that they're fun to play. And that's important for an online study in reducing attrition or minimizing attrition, so that someone will actually kind of have, a bit of a reward processing relationship when they feel good when they do get on the game. You know what I mean? They feel smart and they want to do well, so they're going to try. And that might help keep people engaged. You mentioned Stroop. One of the games is called Double Trouble, and it is similar to the Stroop, where it's a response inhibition game. It's an executive functioning game. So I think there are going to be elements of these other cognitive tests that you mentioned that are already in these games. It's just kind of packaged in a different way.
Okay, then I'm guessing you would try to see how they relate to the performance on the visual tasks as well. So kind of like
Yes.
relate
Yeah.
them to
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's gonna be super cool. And just quick point, I just every time I see the hollow mask illusion, I think about this. There's some studies with schizophrenic patients where they say all schizophrenic patients don't really see the illusion. So
Yes.
for me, it was just like, oh, this is so interesting
Yeah.
that you use it actually
Yes.
with psilocybin, which is 5-HT2, a receptor, which is
That's right.
also yeah, like super cool. Yeah, thank you.
That's right. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because again, we're trying to link these different nodes that have been brought up in the research. We're really trying to bridge these, for instance, psilocybin was described early on in the research as being a model for schizophrenia. And then you have these schizophrenic patients, totally unrelated research, who say they don't experience the hollow mask illusion. And then you have psilocybin research that says, oh, it reduces top-down priors on so, can we is there a study that can help draw these links together? And that's another reason why we wanted to do it with visual illusions. We could have done simpler visual tasks, but there was this element of, there's all this other research that seems a bit, disconnected but related. And so that was another motivation for the project.
Yeah, super cool. Thank
I'm
you.
glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Riel's asking, how long do people wait to do the test after ingesting
Ah,
psilocybin?
so this is a great question, Riel. So when we were piloting the study and people were giving feedback, everyone experiences psilocybin differently. And the way someone experiences it is going to be very much due to their own serotonergic system. And it's not going to be the same between individuals. It's going to vary. The experience is going to vary between individuals as a matter of their physiology. It's also going to vary, like the timing, the onset of effects and experience is going to be different depending on how you ingest it, depending on in what method you take it, whether you drink it, whether you eat it, drink it as a tea or eat it dry, all these different things. And then it's also dose dependent. It depends on how much you take. We did have we have had people actually do it as a microdose. So then it's a question of, when do you start it? When do you know that you're in a psychedelic state if you've taken a microdose? So we don't actually tell people how long to wait after taking the psilocybin. What we do say is only begin the tests when you feel like you are in a psychedelic state. And I think that at least ensures that people are doing it when they're under the effects perceptually of the drug, or when they're feeling it in their body. Because some people, again, some of the feedback we got was that some people are really sensitive and they feel it within 25, 30 minutes, and then some people don't feel anything for like an hour. And you don't want to give the wrong information to someone. So we truly let people decide how long to wait before taking the test. We just encourage them to um, decide for themselves when they're experiencing the psychedelic effects, and that's when they start. And this is something the trip sitter can help with too, again, if they've decided to have a sitter in the room.
And just following on from that, I'm just wondering, since it is online, have you found any difficulties with, I guess, regulating how the trip sitters guide the session and how the interactions work with the trip sitter?
Yeah, sure. In this study, we very much want to strike a balance of because also, depending on the jurisdiction in which one is taking or participating in this study, do we want to be really involved, for instance, like in terms of an anonymity thing, in terms of, so what we do is we try and provide the trip sitter with as many materials as possible. So we actually give a collection of resources that they can use if things are going off the rails, so to speak, or if things are getting anxious for someone. Not, again, we do everything we can to make sure that people will feel comfortable. So part of that is, again, seeking participants who already have a relationship with psilocybin. That's really important. So they have some familiarity. Hopefully that goes well. In terms of the guided session, we actually give trip sitters like a list of, questions that you might want to ask the participant, even encourage them to delay doing it until they feel better. Resources if they start to panic or are feeling worried or whatever, things that they can use in the middle of the session. Yeah, we try and equip the trip sitter with resources, whether the trip sitter themselves has experienced psychedelics or not. We give every trip sitter the same amount of resources to help the person as best as they can, and we leave it up to their discretion to decide what that person needs in the moment. And we encourage actually trip sitters to have a good conversation with the participant in advance to talk about what the participant will need as they're doing the task, what can help them feel comfortable. And yeah, and that's just kind of the best we can do, I think.
Yeah, and it's good that you have that survey to kind of outline the details about the dose and the environment as well, so you can at least try to regulate in some way.
Right.
Ali's asking, do you think the presence of music will influence the results in any way during the psilocybin portion of the visual tasks?
Oh, that's a really great question. I had not thought about that at all, Ali. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because there is an interesting element too, where some people kind of anecdotally say that, what they see synchronizes to what they hear, or vice versa, and so that could be a very interesting confound that I had actually not thought about at all. It might be something worth, asking people about. So we definitely don't have any music going on in the tasks because we want to keep the tasks as focused as possible. So we don't want people enjoying the music too much such that they forget that their reaction time is being recorded on a cognitive task. But we also can't stop them from playing music, which is a very natural thing. So, this might actually, it might actually be a great idea to just actually collect information about how people are structuring the environment in which they're taking the tests, not necessarily asking, are you playing music? But just have just describe to us what it looked like when you were doing it, so we can be like, okay, what else was happening in the room in terms of, and that might actually help give a lot of insight into why the data, the setting, as Riel said, the information on the setting might actually help shed some light on the results. So that's a great question. I appreciate you bringing that up. But to answer it, do I think the presence of music would influence the results? I don't know. It's entirely possible. And then again, I imagine it's dose dependent too. Thank you, Penny.
Yeah, there's actually a researcher, Dr. Stephanie Blaine Moraes in McGill,
Oh,
who's
we
doing.
work with her. Stephanie is
Oh,
great.
okay. Yeah,
We're
because
quite close with Stephanie. She's great.
yeah, since she does biomusic work and it is kind of related to consciousness, that's actually a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, we work very closely with Stephanie's lab. She's wonderful. I'll check that out. I actually hadn't thought about that potential kind of intersection. So thank you for bringing that up.
I think Asani has another question.
Shani, do you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much time I have, but I was just wondering about the ethics. How would you get it approved? Because it's quite interesting. Like it's still not a legal substance, so for like just if you could
Yeah.
say a couple words about that.
Oh yeah, I would love to do a talk someday just about navigating the ethics board. And I can actually do a talk about navigating Health Canada too. That was really interesting because a lot of the reason this study is in the same stage as it was last year was because I've actually spent a lot of my time trying to put together a clinical trial at Western, totally different study, fMRI imaging study. Um, and that's occupied all my time, and it's so I haven't been focusing on my PhD as much. But navigating Health Canada and the ethics board for that study was even more intense than this one because we're actually giving people psilocybin there. So for this online study, we had to make some things very clear. So for instance, some things were really important to the ethics board, like, and we had to talk to lawyers about how to best pitch this. Where is liability? So for instance, imagine a scenario where someone is taken psilocybin, they get into a car accident, and when the authorities go to the house of that person, they see that the study was on the laptop. This was something that the ethics board brought up to us. How do we offload liability, or how do we at least show that we're not implicated in what they decided to do under the influence of the drug? Again, trip sitter is valuable here for a variety of reasons. But if you're so we had to put in the letter of information and consent, please do not operate a motor vehicle while under the influence of psilocybin. We had to actually include the phone numbers for different overdose hotlines in America and Canada. Obviously, this was open to jurisdictions around the world, but we just provided those two numbers. And then hopefully people could find an overdose hotline for their own kind of country or region. And then, yeah, doing things like emphasizing that the actual ingestion itself is not part of the study procedures, which seems really loose. And I understand I understand how that can seem, but the actual ingestion is not part of the study. In that, with the way it's really pitched, we try to maintain the language throughout that if you're already taking psilocybin as part of your lifestyle, and if you're planning to do it already, consider taking these tests while under the state of psilocybin. And that was sufficient for them, at least, to feel comfortable approving this study, to emphasize that we're not telling them how much to take, we're not telling them when to take it, and all they have to do is shut the browser off if they want to stop participating, and they'll never hear from us again. So treating it as offhand as possible, hands off as possible, was really important, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. I mean, like if
I had to give a 40-minute presentation to the ethics board actually to pitch the study. And I had to field their questions. Sorry, it was a 20-minute presentation, and I had to field their grilling me for about 40 minutes on it. And I have a great email from the ethics board, from the director at the time, who said, "Hey Sid, thanks so much for meeting with us today. We really appreciate it. We actually sat and talked for 4 hours after you left, and we really debated it, and we took it to a vote, and it wasn't unanimous, but we've approved the study." So it was like, oh, we were really hanging in the balance, but it worked. So
yeah,
yeah,
nerve breaking, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, so if I feel like if now you have to write another article of how navigate like
sure.
mountain a study like this.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been really interesting, but it's really, it's, to their credit, ethics boards are really important. For however difficult it is, ethics boards are really important in maintaining the integrity of research and also protecting participants. And so, as much of a headache as it was, they do their part. And at the end of the day, we just want to do safe, good research. So they have their role. And it is a valuable process to go through. Yeah. End off on a good, humble PSA, go ethics boards. Note, they're not all bad.
I am aware that it is a 5 p.m. PST, so if anyone does need to leave, you can, but if maybe we can stick around for a couple more questions if
Sure.
anyone
Yeah.
has any
Yeah.
questions.
Absolutely.
I guess I did have a question. I'm wondering what have you guys found in your preliminary results given all these different variations of dosage and trip sitting? Have you anything?
It's really, I don't think I have anything that I can say conclusively. We don't have that many people who've actually fully, we've only got a couple of people, if I'm being totally honest with you, we've only got a couple of people who have completed the full gamut of everything. So it's nice. We know that people are willing to do it. I think one of those people did it on a microdose and the other person did it on a gram of mushrooms. Um, and that was really cool. And then the distribution is interesting. We had someone from Brazil. It's really cool. It's like, oh, okay, so we can, people are willing to do this, and that's really exciting. But I don't have anything. I would really be hesitant to tell you anything. I just don't have the data to support any kind of statement. What I can say is that in the pilot studies we've run with these illusion tasks, the illusion tasks seem to be working really well at capturing illusion strength. So there does seem to be a strong difference between the illusion on and illusion off version for every illusion. And that tells us that we are measuring illusion strength, and that tells us that the test should be valid when people under psilocybin are taking them. So that I can speak to the efficacy of the tests, but I don't think I can say. I like to be really humble with with my results, but hopefully, if I can come back, I'll have, more that I can actually show you. Riel says, how many participants are you aiming for? I mean, I would really love it if we could have, anywhere between 30 to 50 people who've completed the study, let's say. That'd be really great. Obviously, with online studies, because of data quality and the lack of control, you often want many more, sometimes in the realm of hundreds of participants. And so what we often expect for this study is that we'd like to recruit or enroll a couple of hundred of people with the hope that, at least 30 or 50 actually finish it, the whole way through. That would be really nice. You always kind of want to overshoot, so that you can expect most people to drop off and that you can still, have, 30 to 50 full data sets. So I'd be really happy with that. Also, this is my PhD project, so it may be that by the time I actually need to graduate or finish my program, we only have maybe 12 people who finished it. And that'll still be worth writing up, because then we can at least talk to, whether this design of experiment is actually helpful, whether it actually works. And I think it will be a really interesting, we could publish some interesting case studies, let's say. But yeah, 30 to 50 would be great. But probably we'll need to enroll several hundred.
Does anyone else have any last questions?
There's not an age. Thanks, Riel. That's really sweet. There's not an age. I see Ali's question there. And there's not an age cutoff. There's just a minimum age. So truly anyone above 19 and up can participate in the study, and we don't exclude based on age. It'd be really cool if someone who was like, 65 or 70 wanted to do. That'd be really hip. That'd be awesome.
I guess then you'd have to account for differences in attention and
Yeah,
speed.
exactly. Yeah, sure. Um, yeah, what also is great about the cognitive games is that we have a database of like tens of thousands of people. So we can really get a normative database. It's really easy. So many people have taken these tests that it's really easy to generate a demographically matched sample. So people who are statistically the same in terms of age, sex, gender, even things like religiosity and physical activity. It's really easy to actually match. Yeah, if a lot of people ended up doing the study, we could actually still do a pretty interesting comparison. Because old people, we have data sets from people who are elderly who've done the Krayos test, so that's cool.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we will end it there. I did have some more slides to share if that's okay with everyone. And thank you so much for coming. This was such an engaging presentation. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone in saying that I learned a lot and we did engage in a lot of meaningful discussion.
Cool. Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you. Yeah, no, it was my pleasure.
And I think it would be interesting to have that talk on the ethics board and Health Canada approval process.
Oh, cool. Yeah, sure. Sure. That's great.
So these are just some closing remarks. Our next session has been confirmed. The date is wrong actually, but it will be next month, March 13th, and it will be about psychedelics and public health.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
if anyone else within your team, Sid, or anyone that knows other researchers, knows people willing to present, then feel free to email us or have a look on our website. We do have a sign up form on our website, so it is accessible if people want to just use that to sign up.
Sure. That's great, Akanksha. And actually, Philippe is so lovely. And I can, to anyone who's still here, I can vouch for Philippe and say that he's a really wonderful fella. I love Philippe, and he does really great research too. And he was actually really helpful for me in the conception of this online study. And so I will definitely be attending Philippe's talk. That's really great that you've got him on board.
Thank you. And just some closing remarks. Thanks for coming, everyone. And do consider donating if you have the capacity to, as it really does help us. We are a nonprofit organization.
Mm.
And I'm excited to host more research rooms throughout this year. We do have a lot of great things planned, and Riel has been experimenting with the idea of doing it according to themes every month. So a lot of our content on social media, the knowledge translation, research room will all be linked to each other to hopefully present a more cohesive Maps Canada.
Cool. That's great.
Well, I think we can end the meeting there. I did have one question. I think someone mentioned above, Sid, would you be willing to share your presentation slides?
Yeah, sure. Sure, I can do that. I will get that to you perhaps via email, and then perhaps you can circulate that as you feel.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. And we'll end the meeting there, and hopefully I'll see you at the next research room.
Cool. Thank you, Akanksha. Thank you, Riel. Thank you, everyone. It was a real great